What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. And this is a video idea that I've had percolating in my mind for some time. You might think it's a little off topic, but I think it's actually very on topic when we're trying to look at the state of the world, when we're trying to imagine why certain societal structures are in place, how they might affect us, why they're affecting us the way that they are. I think it's actually quite relevant because this is a mainstay of human culture across the globe. What am I talking about? I'm talking about marriage. And what actually gave me the idea to make this video is Tony Sayers made a video today about this idea of twin flames, about soulmates, searching for that twin flame, finding that twin flame. And it got me, again, thinking about this topic that I've thought about before, but through a slightly different lens. And this is not a video that is anti-marriage. This is a video instead asking, is the way that marriage is framed really the problem? Is that what creates a lot of disharmony amongst people, a lot of sadness amongst maybe single people who have had relationships that haven't worked out, right? Is a lot of the unhappiness surrounding relationships, marriages, or lack thereof more a societal construct overlay than the actual fact of being in a relationship or not being in a relationship or having the relationship meet your expectations, etc. Right? Where's the real problem happening? And I'm going to argue in this video that I think it feels to me that it's not that marriage is the problem or relationships or pair bonding, because that's a very natural thing. I think we tend to find somebody that we really click with and connect with, and we want to almost overdose on exposure and time with that person. We kind of lose interest, at least initially, for other people and other interests, maybe to everybody to varying degrees. It's a very natural thing. But for most people, I think to some extent, that desire to potentially seek other new, fresh relationships, even if you don't act upon it, it does return. And then we're left in this place where we're battling these intrinsic desires. Where do these intrinsic desires come from? Why are they showing up, let's say, around the 3 to 4 year mark? And then all of a sudden we feel so guilty about it, and we feel terrible because everything that has been programmed into us is telling us, no, you should just want this one person and that's it. But that's realistically not really how it plays out. We all know this. We all know this on some level, yet we still vilify people that seem to be taken over by just their DNA, their biology at certain points in a relationship, or maybe don't necessarily want to go all the way to the commitment of getting married and oh, like he's got, issues, or he doesn't really care about you, or things like that. And it's like, wait a minute, maybe all this vilification and this infighting it's misdirected, like so much other infighting that we have about little hot topic issues that in a lot of ways feel like are thrown out there to make us squabble and fight, right? So this is about that broader question of maybe if we reframe the way, and I imagine powers that be don't want us to think about it in a different way, but if we did reframe the way that we looked at marriage, a lot of the disharmony that we experience surrounding relationships and marriage might dissolve. So just food for thought. Let's get into the mix. Now, first and foremost, when we look at the average number of sexual partners, this is in the US, I believe. So it says 4.3 opposite sexual sex partners for women, 6.3 for men, from 25 to 49. So my point in showing you this slide, okay, and obviously for some people it's obviously higher, for some people it's lower. Who knows if everybody's reporting accurately? I don't know. But if anything, I would imagine that the actual numbers would be slightly higher than this as opposed to lower. I don't know. Men might lie in the one way, women might lie in the other, right? I don't know. But whatever it is. Okay, why do I show this to you? Because I think a lot of times immediately when we get into a relationship, we're thinking this might be the one. This is the one that we're going to get married. You have these expectations. And I get that. I get that. Maybe it's hopeful optimism, whatever it may be. But the reality is that even if you take these numbers, right? 6.3 for men, 6 sexual partners. Does that mean every single one's a relationship? Maybe not. But let's even say just 3 out of these are actual relationships for a male. Already now you're going to 1 in 3 that actually translate to marriage. So I think if we just say the marriage element or the long-term life partner theoretically, and I'm not even talking about divorce rate yet. I'm just talking about getting married. If we take away this high expectation of, okay, this relationship is going good and it means nothing if it doesn't make it the distance, if it doesn't go to marriage and we don't walk down the aisle together. If we remove that pressure, I think we would be able to enjoy our relationship so much more, because the reality is, mathematically speaking, most don't make it that far, right? And I think this pressure, unrealistic pressure, by the way, not mathematically sound pressure, by the way, I think can harm and injure a lot of people in the relationship in the moment, because we have these expectations. By the way, where are the expectations coming from? They're coming from have you ever looked for a second on Netflix or these other things and just looked at all the movies? Okay, so many of them, they're all about romance. Music is pretty much like 99% romantic, and it's all feeding this kind of general narrative of the one and only, this pair bonding that's going to go throughout time, beyond time, etc. But the math says that most of these relationships that you enter into aren't going to go that way. Again, it's unrealistic expectations and pressure that I think could be causing a lot of people to just have expectations that are out of alignment. And then you get so upset when it doesn't work out. Instead, if you just saw, well, like, wait a minute, the chances are low. We're just going to have fun. We're going to see where it goes. Let's actually figure out if this is the right fit on multiple levels. And if it goes the distance, great. That's a lucky. That's a we're getting a really lucky situation here versus, hey, let's make it fit. Let's force it in. Now, I know that this is complicated by the fact that a lot of people, so I'm not in this category, but a lot of people want to have children. And so for women, especially, you have a very specific window by which to have children. So I understand that can complicate matters. I don't know how to get around that. That's a difficult thing. I haven't really thought that part through, but I do think that if we could just at least at a minimum remove these expectations that each and every single relationship you enter into has a chance to go this distance, like most of them don't. And we should be okay with that, because that's just what the numbers say. Now, another thing that I think we should bear in mind as well is another reason why we should remove the expectation is, even forget about divorce. Okay. Let's think about most marriages that are together. If we look at the trajectory of marriages, it's not all just roses and like a perfect relationship. There's a trajectory. And I would even argue that a lot of marriages that still stay intact, they're just wrought with constant bickering, disagreements, things that, to me, I don't really understand it. I don't really understand. I know sometimes people get into these dependencies and it's harder it feels more difficult to break up than stay together. But I don't understand it when I see it, or when I hear people talking about being in marriages that, man, we kind of really dislike each other right now, or they're fighting more than half the time. Like, I don't understand it. But I like being single. That's maybe I'm unique in that way. Although I think a lot of people potentially don't like being single because they just in the back of their mind, they think, I need to be back in a relationship again. I think it's the expectation that might make them unhappy, or family expectations upon them, right? Whereas I don't let that stuff bother me. So I wonder if people are truly, oh my God, I need to be in a relationship. They trick themselves into being feeling dependent. I don't know, but anyways, that's just another thought, another side. But I think that a lot of times, my point is, a lot of times you say, okay, well, this many people are in relationships. That doesn't mean necessarily the relationships are all rosy and perfect. They could be wrought with, in fact, more disharmony than harmony, yet they continue to stay in it because it feels to them, it seems to them better than the alternative, which is a split, which is a painful break, which sucks. Like, I hate breakups. Terrible. They're one of the worst things. But long term, it still might be the best decision. Now, anyways, we go through the course, right? At the beginning, that honeymoon period, incredible, amazing, right? Saying dopamine driven, idealization, future building are the strongest, right? We've all been in that. It's incredible. It's dope. Now we get to the 5-year. Now this is the lower than start. This is where real life stress, children, money, chores, unmet expectations, fading novelty show up, right? We're going to talk about the fading novelty in a minute when we go to the concept of the 4-year itch. In 10 years now, this is the workhorse years, meaning probably like the years where you have to work on the marriage the most. You're rearing children. You've got career pressure. It's getting very routine. It's less novel. Satisfaction can be lower for many couples. And then 15 years, now it's mixed. Now, this is, I think, a lot of the time where it can either go south and just straight up end in divorce and you kind of stay together, but you're not super happy at this point. And this is asking a lot for a relationship where you're still growing and learning and changing so much to still be at this phase of 15 years and just everything be firing on all cylinders. Like, it's a really, really high bar. I know very few people. I got my one buddy, Jesse, who has the craziest, most insane marriage I've ever seen in my life. And by insane, I mean insanely good. They've been together for 17 years and still everything, I'm talking the intimate part, everything is still there. Like, I almost never hear that. 3 kids, just doing it, living life together. It's incredible. But when I say that, what you're immediately thinking, I imagine that is the exception by far. Okay, so of course it can happen, and I'm not saying you should think this is impossible, but it is usually the exception rather than the norm. And I think if you reframe your expectations, instead be like, hey, why is my marriage not like Jesse at 15 years down the line? I think this would not feel as devastating. You wouldn't have so much resentment towards your spouse. It's like, it's really, really hard to achieve that. Then we go to 20 years. Now, this is interesting. For couples who make it this far and are not chronically distressed, happiness can rebound. So this, you can theoretically bounce back. Shared history, fewer younger child pressures, companionship, and lower conflict often help. That's an interesting fact. So if you do make it through this period that can be maybe a little bit bumpy, perhaps for the ones that do make it this far, things can generally settle down. But again, now this is information that I've drawn from ChatGPT, giving a very detailed query. And hopefully this is apparently from the Institute for Family something. I don't remember the exact citation, but it does give the citation right there. Those are the abbreviations, IFS. But yeah, that's where I got this data and information from. So this is something to bear in mind. It's not all just up, or, keeping steady, right? Obviously, there's going to be dips. They talk about it being a U-shaped, like a parabola, like it kind of dips and then maybe rebounds at that 20-year mark. But this is important to bear in mind, right? When you have these major expectations of it's supposed to be like a Hollywood fairy tale and just supposed to be blissful and perfect, these expectations can then make those dips feel that much worse and be like, what is happening? This is not how it's supposed to be. Yes, it is. You just don't know the data. You're looking at the fairy tale that's not realistic, and that I think can put added pressure and stress on a relationship. Now let's talk about the 4-year itch. I learned about this in biopsychology back when I was in high school, way, way, way back in the day. So what is the 4-year itch if you haven't heard of it? Humans may have evolved a tendency towards serial pair bonding. A pair bonding lasting roughly 3 to 4 years could have been adaptive because it kept 2 parents long enough to get a child through infancy and weaning. After that, the biological pressure maintaining the bond might weaken, making new mating opportunities more attractive, right? I mean, I think we see this all the time. Obviously, infidelity is all over the place in the US and marriages and relationships. Fisher links this reproductive age couples, younger divorce peaks, and couples with 2 or fewer children. The problem is that modern marriage asks one relationship to do everything: erotic novelty, best friendship, parenting, cohabitation, financial partnership, emotional therapy, lifelong identity, and legal contract. Biology may be optimized for bonding and reproduction, but not necessarily for permanent erotic exclusivity, plus domestic stability, plus self-actualization for 50 years, right? Again, it can happen. I'm not saying it can't happen, but that shouldn't be the expectation. It sounds like it should be more the exception, that it can hit all of those pieces, especially with this massive biological element there. And again, remember, when you're in the midst of that new romance, the 4-year itch is kicking, your dopamine's rushing, that's the time where you're going to think, no, I never want to let this person go. I mean, that's how you're going to feel in the moment. But that reaction and that emotional response and that chemical response could very well, and does often usually, change. So these are the times where typically you're in a relationship for 2 years, 3 years. You do the proposal, you get married, and boom. And then you're heading into that marriage, maybe as the 4-year itch is coming into play, or maybe it just already began once you finally get married. But then what? Right? Then you got the family pressures, you got society, you got kids coming in the way. You want to have a stable household for the kids. I mean, so again, there's all these things, but I think the point here is when we recognize the biology, it's again, the expectation is super out of alignment with what we see statistically and what we are programmed for biologically. Not to say that it can't happen, But if we remove this expectation, how much happier I think would people be? How much less stressed would they be? How 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 much more would they be able to handle these breakups? I think a lot of times breakups feel so devastating because you're hinging your hopes on achieving this massive, this super difficult thing of a lifelong bond with all of these elements, but it's just not realistic. And I think that adds to some of the heartbreak and pain that people go through. Now let's talk about the actual divorce rate. So again, we've talked about relationships, breakups prior to getting married, also the general trajectory of marriages that stay together past the 20-year mark. But what about just now divorce rates? You've heard this idea of divorce rates being, I guess, like 60% and above. Apparently that's not true. When I looked it up, it says that it has actually dropped. It's around 40 to 45% of marriages in the US anyways that eventually end in divorce. And it says it's significant, but it reflects a downward trend compared to past decades. So I guess it's actually decreasing. But again, just based on the math, and I know some people are just not going to want to accept this, but from a statistical standpoint, yeah, you could say, okay, fine. The success rate is greater than 50%. So it should be the expectation. But that's like, that would be saying, if you invested in something, let's say you're gambling on somebody and you're like, hey man, they've got a 55 to 60% chance winning. That's not something you're going to bank on. That's still a pretty risky bet, especially with the other odds being so substantial that it just falls apart. It's not as though, okay, 60% chance I'll make 10%, 40% chance I'll make 2%, or like it's all or nothing, right? Those are pretty big odds. And that's a pretty substantial size contingency that is going to effectively fail. So again, I think the expectations of this relationship, it's got to go the distance. And if it doesn't, it's, what's wrong with this person or that person that they don't want to go that far. Well, we talk about the number of relationships that even make it to that point, then the parabolic trend of the happiness levels and how difficult that is. And then on top of that, how many of these end up failing? How many of these end up breaking up? And then think about all the issues that stem from divorce and splitting of assets and kids. I mean, so there's just so much to think about. Again, how should we use that to modify the expectation? So finally, this is the conclusion. This is actually the conclusion of Chat GPT, but I think this makes total sense after I asked it to do all this research. What should be the outlook on marriage? Ultimately, marriage is probably best when it is intentional, rare, and earned by the quality of the bond, not assumed because two people are in love, sexually attracted, aging, lonely, religiously pressured, financially entangled, or afraid to start over. A healthier modern standard might be: do not ask, should everyone get married? Ask, is this specific bond strong enough, honest enough, stable enough, and mutually beneficial enough to justify making it legal, financial, social, domestic, sexual, and possibly parental? I mean, like, I didn't even write that, but I agree 100% with that statement. Again, just to restate, this is not me saying, this is not me being anti this union. I mean, the legality of it, obviously, it's something to think about, but you can navigate around a lot of the potential legal ramifications. Obviously, when you factor in divorce with a good prenup. Okay, so there's ways around that element, but regardless, this type of a union or a bond can potentially work, but think about it in that frame of mind. I think if we take off the pressure and say it could happen, but it may not, and let this be more of the exception rather than the norm, I think people would approach relationships so much differently, so much more positively. Breakups as more, this is just a part of what happens. It can feel disappointed. It can feel hurtful. Obviously, you're missing that person. There's always going to be that pain that's going to be there. But I think that added element of, but I thought we were going to get married or this was going to be for our entire lives. It's like, well, but that's not logical. That normally is not how it goes. It's just live with that and accept that. It's like, okay, these things happen. I think that could soften the blow. I think that could raise everybody's happiness. That's my 2 cents. Again, food for thought. It's one of these systems, one of these societal standards that's in place that I think overall brings the happiness level down, brings the anxiety levels up. Just give it a thought, rethink it, because perhaps it's not there, that these societal pressures for our benefit. That's all I got for this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Again, a little bit of a different topic than some of the stuff I've been covering, but I think it relates because, and that's why I want to talk about it. Again, talking about the twin flame idea, but more importantly, let's reconsider some of the things that are happening in our society that may not be there for our benefit, that may not be there for even theoretically the short-term government's benefit, but maybe there in a way to stir the pot, right? Keep us in a higher level of emotional angst and anxiety. Food for thought. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.